Firstly, tonight we're going to be talking about sound in education specifically. And the three things we really want to focus on are, why is sound so important in education? Right, you probably know, but I think we'll enlighten you a bit there. And also, what is meant by good sound in educational settings? Right, not hi-fi, I'm not talking about that. And the other is, let's have a look at the role of technology in delivering that good sound. Now, along the way, because there's a lot of people watching this, I know, that are not music teachers. There's a few music teachers I'm well aware of in this room. A couple more just came in. But there's principals, there's deputies, there's IT people, all sorts of people. So I'm going to be suggesting a few opportunities where you might encourage or get your students to explore some interesting facts around sound and technology and other things which have got a STEM focus. And also hopefully give you a few ideas for arts applications as well. And that really is exciting. I've seen so much of that happen in primary schools where they've got quite elaborate PA systems, and you've got years 5 and 6 who are setting it up, making it operate. They've got to collaborate. They've got to work with whoever is going to be presenting. It's not just music. It's quite often the principal, right? You've got to teach the principal how to hold a microphone. Right? All of those sorts of things come up. Now, firstly, sound or audio is the most important medium for communications and, of course, learning. That's what comes out of that. And physiologically, you actually are influenced by sound long before you're born. Before you're born, it actually has quite an impact on your development, and it's certainly key to developing your language. If you have a look at, though, the physiology of this, right, how you hear, the hearing is your fastest, most responsive sense, right? I don't know if you've realised that. I know there's some music teachers here. If you've ever played a keyboard on a computer and you've had latency or delay, if it's as little as 10 milliseconds, 100th of a second, you can hear it, right? That's how sharp your hearing is. Whereas eyes, right, if you go back to the old days when movies were first created, you only had to have 16 frames a second for your eyes to perceive it as moving. So a 16th of a second compared to 100th of a second. Enormous difference. The other senses, you know what they are. I don't think they're going to help you very much communicating, not to the way that you want to. Of course, it's really the brain that does all the work, and that is how you decide what sounds you want to hear versus the ones you don't, particularly when you're having a conversation in a crowded restaurant, or not. And if you have a look at students that have autism in particular, right, they have great difficulty separating speech and communications from background noise. And also they have a lot of other effects that affects their learning and quite often behaviour. They get anxious. There's quite a few things. So that is one of the reasons why sound is so important. And that's why we say good sound is important. And what that really means is that we must have sound, speech, considerably higher than the background noise of the room. Now, let's have a look at the science. Just as a matter of interest, if I hold my hands up, about so, how far apart are they, roughly? A metre, 90 centimetres, anyone else? 900, right, not 106 or something. Right, how do you know that? How do you know that's about a metre? You're right, it's about a metre. How? You didn't come out here and measure it. Yeah, but you've got experience of that, right? You've been measuring things, you've seen things, you're accustomed with that. All right. How loud am I talking right now? Sorry? Quietly? Reasonably? I want a measurement.
I'd say 70 something.
Oh, mezzo forte then.
75.
Now we're getting musical. All right. Let's have a look, all right? Because this is where it's very important that you should learn these things, because once you get the experience of working with them, right, same as you just told me that I had my arms about a metre apart, right, you should know roughly how many decibels my sound is producing. And it's important because that's how you're going to decide what's good and what's bad in sound and what you need to do to fix it, right? It's all relative. So what I've got here, and hopefully this will work. Yes? Okay. I'm talking now, and you can see the little meter up the top there. It's showing on the screen here in the front. That's cameras on it for you. Around about 60 decibels when I'm talking. 60 decibels is normal conversation at the distance you need to communicate, say 1 metre or 2. So remember that. That's a reference point for you. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that that's the sound that you're hearing there. We're looking at a real-time analyzer, and at the left-hand end, we've got all of the low frequencies, right, which are right down below our hearing in some cases, and then right up the top. So roughly from 20 to 20,000 hertz, right, which is the number of vibrations a second, is what your ears can hear. But what you hear is really not what's there. And this is really the confusion. If I stop talking for a moment, so you can just see the background noise in the room, right? So I'll be very quiet. About 39, 40 decibels, right? A classroom should be about 35 decibels when it's empty. And that is the design criteria of most schools, right? And that is around the country and in New Zealand. That's quite a standard. However, you can see what's there. I'm going to show you now what noise is really in the room, because what you're looking at there is the noise that your ears hear. Your perception of loudness is not the same as how loud sound is, because your ears are not linear. They are tuned to voice, right? Because we are designed to communicate that way. So your ears are very tuned and most sensitive to voice. And that happens at around the 1,000 to 3,000, right? About an octave or so above middle C on a piano, for those who are familiar with that. That's the most sensitive part of your hearing at normal listening levels. Let's have a look at what's really there. I'll turn this to what we call flat, so you'll actually see all of the, that's it. Look at the level. It's about 56 to 60 in the room when I'm not talking, and have a look at all of these low frequencies here that you are not hearing. That's the air conditioning, all the other things, right? The buzz and the lights, all sorts of things are happening that you cannot hear. I don't know if you can see it on there, but there's a blue line that goes down there. That is the threshold of your hearing. So it goes down, and of course threshold, by definition, 0 decibels is the quietest sound a human being can hear at the voice frequencies. And as you go down below that and as you go up, they have to be much, 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 much louder for you to hear them at all. As the volume goes up, right, you start turning things up to very high levels, that becomes more linear, right, so that you then can hear bass. So what I'm trying to get across to you here is that sound that you hear is not necessarily the sound that's there, and that you have to be aware, therefore, when you're choosing the technology, that you are reinforcing the appropriate things that you want to hear. And we're talking particularly voice here, right? So any questions on that? Does that make sense? Right, let's have a look at, and why have I got that up there? I better fix that, hadn't I? Okay, we're getting there. Here's some reference points that you should know, or it'll help you understand what you're trying to do when you get to the sound technology side. 0, by definition, is the threshold of hearing, right? That is the quietest sound that a human being can hear. I should point out that it's the quietest sound that a young human being can hear. Sadly, as you get to about 35 or 40, right, what happens is, if you can see the graph over there, is that still on camera there, Dave? Not sure, but I'll walk over to it if that's easier. Right, you know that you can't hear this at low levels. That doesn't change much with age. What does change is up here at the higher end, right? At my age, if you can get to 10K, you're really doing well, right? Young Stephen's there, you probably get to about 10.5, right? Just. Okay, yeah, I'll try and stand still for you there, Dave. Right, let's have a look at these. So 0 is the threshold. 35 dB, as I mentioned, is an empty classroom, right? That should be there. Of course, when you get the kids in there, that changes. 60 decibels is the average conversation level. Then, just for the heck of it, 80 decibels is what you hear in an aircraft when you're cruising. It's pretty loud, right? You've got that constant drone. Now, if you were to, by the way, there's plenty of apps that you can get on your phones, right? Whether it's an iPhone or Android, which have dB meters. And they all have that same scale that I'm talking about. It's called A-weighted, which corresponds to the curve that your ears hear. And you'll find, therefore, that when you turn that on in an aircraft, it'll be about 80 decibels when you're cruising. If you buy a dB meter and you pay for the app, not a freebie, and you can turn it to flat or C-weighted, you'll hear all sorts of sounds that you don't know that are in that plane, and it'll be scary, the amount of stuff that you're actually getting hit with that you can't hear. It's quite fascinating. Moving up, 100 decibels is loud classical music. So is a rock band, by the way. And of course, a serious rock music is about 120. That is the threshold of pain. You will feel it, right? It is not very comfortable. Now, just for the sake of this, right, there are rules about how much sound that you can be exposed to, because if you are exposed to high levels of sound for periods of time, it will permanently and prematurely damage your hearing for good. And there's plenty of people out there that are now listening to their iPods and phones and all that stuff at high levels that they're going to regret by the time they're about 35 or 40, sadly. 85 decibels is what you are allowed to be exposed to all day. And that's just over what's in an aircraft. And that's why aircraft go to a lot of trouble to keep it down below that. Because if it was 85 and you were more than an 8-hour flight, you could probably sue them. Right, so 85 is, by specification, the amount of sound you can be exposed to all day. As you increase by 3 decibels, you halve the time you're allowed to be exposed. So 88, 4 hours. 91, 2 hours. By the time you get to 100 decibels, which is what a lot of music teachers are standing in front of with stage bands and concert bands and so on, 15 minutes. That's all you can be exposed to all day. Scary. You need to take action. Earplugs, and I'm not talking about the ones you wear at the Grand Prix, earplugs that you have attenuation. In other words, you hear all of the sound, it just lowers it by about 12 to 15 decibels, gets you back to that safe level. And kids that are in the band should be wearing them too, especially the guys that are standing in front of the trumpets, like trombone players, etc. Right? So let's have a look then at what you really need to get clear speech, right? Whatever the background noise is, right? And I'm sure that you have spoken in noisy environments. By the way, just those that know online, I've got a microphone on me here, right, which is purely for the online sound. I am not using a PA in this room, right? So just so that you know, and I might get this turned off later if we want to try something. But if Dave has got the background noise there, Dave, you just want to quietly just bring up what a classroom might sound like, and he's controlling the sound system. And I don't know whether any relationship to him. And what I'll do is, let's have a look at the sound level. I'll make it A-weighted. Right, that classroom was about 70 decibels. Is that an unreasonable level of sound that you experience? Is that typical, right? When you're in a classroom and everything's going on and kids are talking and you're trying to communicate, right? A bit much? Yep, okay. Down, say, 60 decibels maybe, 10 dB, right. Just so you know, a change of 10 decibels gives you the feeling of twice the volume in your ears. Right? To actually get 10 decibels, though, requires 10 times the power. It's a huge amount. Right? So in other words, if you're listening to a 50-watt amplifier and you want it to be twice as loud, that's not a 100-watt amplifier. It's a 500-watt amplifier to get twice the loud, all other things being equal. Right? It's quite incredible. There are other ways to do it. Right? And I'm not going to go into those today because it's a bit technical. Okay, you've got to get your voice 15 decibels above the ambient noise to be clear. That's the definition, 15 decibels. So if the background noise is 50, you need to get to 65 so that everyone can hear what you are saying. The other aspect, of course, is not just the level, right? You also have to take into account the environment that you're in, commonly known as acoustics. Right, we're not going to go into acoustics today. That'll be a session that we might do later because you can control those acoustics. But acoustics means that the sound that you are putting into the room from your voice or anything else hits walls, hits hard ceilings, and bounces around. And the person out there who's trying to hear you, right, is getting your voice directly, but also all these reflections. Try talking in a gym, right? It's a nightmare. So you use technology in two ways, right? And we'll be talking one of the ways today, and we'll talk about a variation on that in a moment. But the first thing is to try and make sure that you can get the level of direct sound at least 15 decibels above the ambient noise. That's number one. In other words, getting the level up directly above the noise that you need, or the ambient level. The other is, and you can do this, is to control the direction of the sound to minimize reflections off walls and ceilings and so on. Right? You don't do that with the smaller systems, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but the more advanced systems, the placement of speakers, the type of speakers we choose and so on, can control where the sound goes. So you don't just stick a couple of speakers in the room and blast it out at a high volume. You do that in a gym and you just increase the whole problem, right? Everything bounces around louder. So all you're doing is making the problem louder, not fixing it. So it's a matter of A, getting the loudness that you need so that it's 15 decibels, and then try and control the direction. The other thing that you can do with technology, not tonight, is to treat the room. In other words, you change the surfaces, you put acoustic treatment and so on. In gyms, that's very expensive, right? But it can be done. Better still that the gym was designed in the right way in the first place, because that also can be done, and it's a lot cheaper at that point than trying to fix it later, right? So we'll talk about that in another session, because I think that's very interesting. And we're not talking about soundproofing. That's another thing again. Soundproofing is the prevention of sound between rooms, right? So that next door doesn't hear what you're doing and vice versa, right? Sound treatment will control the level of sound within the room. Of course, if you keep the level down, that helps the guys next door, right? Because it's a bit softer, all right? Any questions up to this point, by the way?